Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today we're going to be doing another position ranking, this time the running back rooms for every single United Football League team. Now, a couple days ago I did the quarterback room rankings. A lot of you seem to really enjoy that, whether you agreed or disagreed with some of the placements, and we're going to continue that by doing the running back room. Now, the running back room is a big deal. We've seen teams like the Stallions and Defenders, and especially the Gamblers this past season, pretty much survive thanks to a great running back room. Now, yes, the Stallions and Defenders both had incredible quarterbacks, but if it wasn't for guys like Bo Scarborough in 2022 or CJ Marable this past season for the Stallions, they probably wouldn't have won the championship. Just like in the XFL, we wouldn't have seen the Defenders make it to the championship game without Abram Smith. And the Gamblers, they basically were just running an offense through Mark Thompson for 8 weeks when he was healthy, and they barely came up short, mainly because the 2 games he didn't play, they lost. So running backs is a very important position and group, so we're going to be ranking them all from worst to best in the overall room. Just like the quarterback, the starter matters a bit more than the other positions and, the backups, third strings, and all that. And as always, like I said before, I like the guys that have spring football experience. So some of these newcomers I'm going to put on a lower pedestal, as even though we do see some big names like Trent Richardson back in the AAF days end up succeeding, much like with quarterbacks, we sometimes see the big name guys end up struggling in spring football. So just because they were, notable names doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be good and that I'm going to put them higher. Now, also, next Monday or Tuesday, depending how uploads go, is going to be my Q&A for the 500 subscriber special. So if you have any questions for me about the league, myself, other YouTubers, or anything, leave them down below. And without further ado, let's get started with number 8, the Battlehawks. Yeah, it's going to make some people upset, but at the same time, this shouldn't be a shock to anybody. The Battlehawks lost their actual running back from last season due to free agency, and he's just, at the moment, just kind of gone. And then their addition to replace him in Max Borghi retired. And now their starter is probably going to be Wayne Gallman. Now, the last time we saw him as a legit starter, he looked really solid, right? I mean, he's been in the NFL for a few years, and back when Saquon got hurt in 2020, he actually played a decent amount in that year, and he looked pretty solid. But considering the fact that just after that, he ended up bouncing from Atlanta to Minnesota and then hasn't actually, played on a field again, at least, on the active roster and all that, not a good look for him. So there's a lot of questions naturally. Is he going to be fully healthy in a sense that he has a lot of, years on him already compared to a lot of these other spring football guys that are either pretty young or guys who have only played a couple years. So we'll see how he's able to hold up a full season. I expect him to be healthy, but we'll see. But of course, the backups are also pretty suspect. Mateo Durant wasn't really anything insane. He looked pretty solid in the limited touches he had this past season, averaging about 4 yards a carry is a really solid number. It's not the best number, but it's not the worst. But then you have someone like Kayvon Lattilis, who really didn't look that great even in college. He looked all right. I mean, he had great averages, but it is college football. It's a lot easier. And at the end of the day, it's not like he ever had 1,000 yards. And then, of course, when you look at a guy like Jacob Sailors, he was an undrafted free agent this past offseason, and that's pretty much all he was. He signed to a team, didn't really do anything. So I think that overall the Battlehawks are the weakest. I think that backup-wise, they're probably the weakest team, and starter-wise, I think Gallman has the potential to be a top 4 running back in this league. It's just hard to put this group above any other team, especially when number 7 themselves have a legit starter. Because number 7 is going to be the San Antonio Brahmas. The Brahmas have a legit starter in John Lovett. Lovett was part of, let's call it, a not-so-good team in the Vegas Vipers. And he was really solid. I mean, the man had over 200 yards in both rushing and receiving. Despite the fact he only had 16 receptions, he was really good at that. 5 TDs overall, and again, he was on Vegas, not a good team, and he was able to put up the stats he did. He is probably going to be the starter on this team, though I would not be shocked if Bryson Elaine ends up being the starter, as he was with Wade Phillips back in Houston this past season, where he put up almost 200 yards rushing. Now, the other 2 guys they have on this team are both guys who have played in the NFL, both on the Steelers. You have Anthony McFarland Jr. and Jalen Samuels. Now, Samuels, you actually might remember, the dude had over 1,000 yards of scrimmage. He only had 5 TDs, and his rushing average was pretty pitiful at 3.4. But he still is a guy with a decent amount of NFL experience, whereas McFarland had a lot less time on the field, but put up pretty similar stats all in all. So, the question is, how good is this group going to be? I wouldn't be shocked if McFarland gets put as a return guy. He returned in the NFL, so I wouldn't be shocked. But at the end of the day, this group is just barely better than St. Louis, because I like Elaine as the backup better than Durant. And I think that Lovett is a guy who has proven himself, though I would not be shocked at all if Gallman ends up being above him. These two are kind of interchangeable, but I'd rather have the two NFL experienced guys in my backups who don't have a ton of wear and tear on their bodies versus the backups that St. Louis has, and then have your number one backup being Bryson Elaine over Mateo Durant. So even if the starter is a wishy-wash to me, I think that all three backups San Antonio have are better, so I'm putting him at 7. Now, number 6 is going to be the Memphis Showboats. Now, let me start by saying this. Number 6 to 1, unlike the QB room video, these are all really close. Look, the running back group that's in this league is insane. I've seen a lot of people talk about, is this the best group of quarterbacks spring football's ever seen? I think you need to stop talking about that and start talking about the running back group because it's insane. These top 6 teams are loaded at running back, either because they have one unbelievably good running back or a multitude of really solid ones. So I could realistically see an argument for maybe any one of these top 6 teams to be number 1. So if your team's all the way down here at like 6 or 5, they're still really close to being a top 3 team. Whereas the QB room video, it was pretty much the top 2, then 3 and 4 were close. 5 was by itself, 6 and 7 were close. This is the top 6 are all pretty close, but 6 is going to be the Showboats. Why? They only have 3 running backs. So unless they sign someone in the next couple days, this is basically who they're going to have on opening day, on kickoff. Admittedly, that's not bad. Kennedy Brooks is a guy that I said when he did get signed to the United States Football League this offseason, I was like, he has promise. The dude put up 1,000 yards all 3 seasons he played in college at Oklahoma, a big school, impressive. Kareth White, he looked pretty solid this past season, and now he's going to be a backup behind Darius Victor, who is quite arguably a top 3 running back in the league, at worst, top 4. So, that's really good. So, why are they at 6? Because they're pretty much stuck with these guys at the moment. And the fact is, other teams either have way more depth or the starter is a bit better than Vito. Look, Darius Victor was incredible this past season, but he did have a lot more fumbles at 4 versus what he did the year prior. So as long as he can get that under control, it'll be pretty good. But there's a couple other running backs that are just better, or their backups are better. Again, this is where it gets really close, but I'm putting the Showboats at 6. It's no hate to any of the guys on here, as I think that all in all, there's a very good shot this group becomes really good. It's just, if someone were to get hurt in training camp, they're going to have to go sign somebody. And naturally, it's the question of, do these guys want to come back and play in the UFL instead of the USFL or XFL, like a Reggie Corbin if they need him? We'll see. So I'm putting him at 6, mainly because of a lack of depth and the fact that while Kareth White was solid this past season, a lot of it was because he played a lot and solid in the counting stats, in the actual quote-unquote metrics like yards per carry. 3.7 is nowhere near Vito's 5.5 or what other guys put up. And especially since he wasn't that threatening in the receiving game, he was solid, but even Vito was better at that as well. And Kennedy Brooks hasn't really done a ton of receiving work in college. The receiving backfield, there's a lot of teams that have it better, while Vito is still solid. So I'm putting him at 6. It's close, but they're 6. And then number 5 is going to be the Renegades. I actually originally put him at 6, and I kind of convinced myself to put him above the Showboats, purely because of the overall depth of the roster. De'Veon Smith is not better than Darius Victor. Let me just say that right now. If he is better than him this next season, I'll be shocked. No hate to De'Veon Smith. Pizzagate guy, no hate to him. It's just that I'd rather have Vito. But Letty Brown, Devin Darrington, Morgan Ellison, Day-Day Hunter. 3 of those guys played in the XFL this past season and all put up over 100 yards. In fact, 2 of them put up over 200. Morgan Ellison at 250 as a part of the Dragons. Darrington at 290 as a part of Orlando. And then Letty Brown put up some decent stats. I believe he played for 2 different teams, something like that. I believe he's on both teams or something. Or the site was weird, but so I say, solid group. Devin Darrington is a really solid backup to have. And then Morgan Ellison is a really solid backup to have. And even Brown is a solid backup to have. And then Day-Day Hunter, we'll see how good he ends up being. He hasn't been in spring football really, but he had a couple okay years back in college with Hawaii Liberty. So overall, this team gets above the Showboats, not because of the high-end talent, but the overall depth of talent. Because you have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 legit spring football veterans who have all looked, at worst, pretty solid. So I'm going to put them at 5 because of the fact they don't have the heavy hitters that the top 4 teams all have, but they still are pretty solid overall. They come at number 5. The number 4 is going to be the DC Defenders. The Defenders suffer from lack of depth compared to the teams above them. Abram Smith is probably the third best running back in the league, or second. I know a lot of people say he's first. I'm sorry, he's not first in my book. He's at best second, which is that's nothing to scoff at. It's just I think there's one guy that's clearly better than him. He is second, third, or fourth. It depends whether you have Wes Hills or Darius Victor above him. I would personally probably rather have Victor, but I'd rather have Smith than Hills. That's just me. He's incredible. He had by far the most rushing yards this past season at 788, though he did also have the most carries by a pretty wide margin, but he did have 7 TDs. The only issue is that receiving-wise, 17 receptions for 91 yards, or 13 receptions, my bad, isn't the most insane of stats for a receiving back, especially when you had a quarterback as good as Te'amu was this past season. But the issue is in the backups. Look, Cameron Harris did play with them this past season, but he only played in really the postseason. And he looked pretty decent in the North Division, but he only had 5 carries. And granted, 5 yards per carry and 2 TDs is nothing to scoff at with a long of 11. But I'm not going to put a guy that had like one game of being pretty good as that's an incredible backup. And then your other backups in like Darius Higgins, Puka Williams, Tobias Taylor. As I've talked about before, Williams is mainly a return guy for this team. That's what he did most of the season this past year. And I expect it to probably be the same. Then Taylor and Higgins, they both, they had college careers. We don't know exactly what they are. This team is only this high because their starter is so good, as even though their depth isn't as great, it still is more overall depth. Again, 4 to 6 is really close, because while I do like Victor over Smith, that's just personal preference, but you can't really deny what Smith did this past season. So, much like I kind of talked myself to put in the Renegades above the Showboats, I also did that with the Defenders. So the Defenders come in at 4. Now, number 3 is going to be the Birmingham Stallions. Now, the Stallions, a lot of people really sleep on CJ Maribel. I think a lot of people forget that he was really good in year 1, and then Bo Scarborough came, and then this past season, they all think about Alex Magoo, but they forget about how good CJ Maribel was this past season as well. 4.4 yards per attempt, 230 receiving yards. That's over 750 total yards he had this past season. He did fumble 4 times to only 5 TDs, but to have that as probably your backup, since he was the backup last season before Bo Scarborough got hurt, is pretty incredible. Bo Scarborough is remembered because as soon as he got signed, he just went on. He went off. In the 2 playoff games he had in 2022, he put up 174 yards. It's 87 yards per game, which if you know spring football, you know that putting up that many yards per game is incredible. A 7.3 yards per attempt, which granted helped by the 70-yard run he had. So he was incredible. He was really good in the regular season too. He was up there in rushing yard leader despite only playing a few games. It's just that he got hurt right at the beginning of this past season. Just like Jamar, just like Marlon Williams. Now, the other guys, when you look at Ricky Person Jr., he was on this team this past season. He, only played a little bit, but he has familiarity with the system. Same with Holly. He is a fullback, so he's one of the fullbacks I was talking about. But he has experience on this team, so that's good to have. And then when you look at Larry Roundtree, he is a dude that has NFL experience. It's nowhere near the likes of, the Steelers that the Brahmas got or Wayne Gallman. But he has played in the NFL and actually, seen, he's been there. Granted, his rushing average of 2.2 is pretty pitiful. But, yeah, I think that when you look at this team, it's the fact that I think their starter is not as good as Vito or Scarborough. But your starter plus your backup, it's pretty hard to argue any team is better except the one I have above them. I'm putting as a better duo. So I'd say this is probably the second best duo in terms of a number 1, number 2 running back in the whole league. You're talking about 2 really, really, really good running backs in Scarborough and Maribel. So while I don't think either of them are top tier guys, they're both really good. And Scarborough has shown flashes of being a top guy. It's just I'm not going to call you a top guy until you play a full season. So I'm putting them at 3. Really solid group. Very underrated. They're at 3. Number 2 is going to be the Michigan Panthers. I know I've had my gripes before, but at the end of the day, Wes Hills was incredible this past season. Now, yes, he won the rushing crown mainly because he had a bunch more carries than everybody else. If Mark Thompson or Darius Victor had the carries he had, he would not have won the rushing crown leader. He had 3.8 average, which isn't great, but a lot of that dipped at the end of the season, which is my big issue I had, was that he dipped a lot during the end of the season. But over 278 receiving yards, he was the scrimmage yards leader. In terms of, this dude had 679 rushing yards to pair of 278 receiving yards. That's incredible. And the fact is he did have a pretty solid amount of TDs in 10. It wasn't number one in the league, but a rushing TD per game is pretty solid. 4 fumbles isn't the best, but we've seen guys that have that many. Then their backup is probably going to be Matt Colburn II. He was the starting running back, and he's been pretty hot or cold, but admittedly, he had a very pitiful offensive line this past year. Now, even though in the year prior, when the offensive line wasn't as bad, I had my issues with him, when he was good, he was still really good. And even though he only had a 3.4 average, a lot of that was because of how bad the O-line was. So him putting up 264 is actually pretty impressive, and 4 TDs. And his receiving threat, not the biggest receiving threat that we saw this past season. But then you look at the backups, the other guys. I mean, you look at guys like Raymond Calais. Dude's been on a bunch of NFL rosters, so he's had experience. He was with the Defenders this past season. Then you look at Nate McCreary, bunch of NFL experience on practice squads and all that. And then you have, Toa Taua, who was a really solid running back in Nevada. Not incredible, just, solid. I think they're overall a bit better than the Stallions because I think that Wes Hills and Matt Colburn are probably better than Bo Scarborough and CJ Maribel, because Wes Hills, I think, is better than both Bo and CJ. And Colburn is maybe close to being as good as Maribel. And their backups are pretty close, so I'm giving the edge to the Panthers. The number one is going to be the Roughnecks. I mean, come on. They drafted a running back like out of nowhere in one of the drafts, despite having Mark Thompson, despite having TJ Pledger. The number one. Mark Thompson is the best running back in the league. Look, XL fans can try to, make a case for Smith. Mark Thompson played 8 games and was clearly the best running back in the league. He won Offensive Player of the Year over Wes Hills, over Corey Coleman, who was unbelievable this past season. And it wasn't even a race. I mean, if he had played all 10 games, he would have been the rushing leader. He had like 14 TDs or something stupid in only 8 games. I mean, those were numbers that were actually comparable to like the original USFL where they played 18-game seasons. Say what you want about the spring football today versus back then. That's insane. That a guy can play 8 games and have as many touchdowns as a bunch of top players did in an 18-game season. He was all USFL. He was the best running back in either league this past season. Then you look at TJ Pledger. He's a really solid backup. Is he, a top-tier guy? No. He only played a couple games, and in the couple games he played, it was like 4 games total. He put up almost 200 yards, averaged almost 50 yards per carry. Solid numbers. Then your other backups, guys like Ezra Gray and guys like Shamari Jones. Jones was actually part of the Gamblers this past season, but both those guys have played in the USFL, so they have some spring football experience. Then you have a fullback, which if you want to run the eye, especially since their quarterbacks are pretty suspect, since they're going from last in the quarterback to number 1 in the running back, having a fullback is great. You can use him and actually, do blocking schemes and actually, just run the ball down people's throats. So having Ryan Nall is really solid. He has NFL experience as a fullback. That's pretty good. And then, of course, Tyon Evans, he was, he looked decent in college, at least statistics-wise. I mean, at the end of the day, this team is number 1 because of Mark Thompson and TJ Pledger. Because it's like the Defenders where you have that top-tier running back, but now you have a legit, really good backup to pair with some other solid back-end guys. And having a fullback is a pretty big deal for this team. So I think that overall they are the best running back group in the entire league. So that'll do it for this list. As I said before, 1 to 6 are pretty close. But I will say that I don't see any argument for really the Brahmas or Battlehawks to be higher than the bottom 2. I just don't. I think that if you put them higher, you're either admitting you're a Battlehawks fan or you're just trying to, hate on a team. Because, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put Wayne Gallman above Darius Victor just because Gallman played in the NFL. Using the NFL argument itself as the only reason why a guy is great. Look, having experience is a big deal, but especially in Gallman's case and being a running back, he's played a lot in the NFL. His body has a lot of wear and tear. I'm sorry. No, I'm not putting him above, the Stallions. I'm not putting him above the Roughnecks. Not putting him above the Defenders. And the Brahmas, I mean, come on. They're a bunch of solid running backs. Nothing until we see it on the field is going to change my mind that they should be higher than these other teams, barring a signing. So that'll do it. This is my list. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos, because I'm planning on maybe doing 1 or 2 more of these position group videos and then leading them into the power rankings video for training camp. Again, next week, Monday or Tuesday, will be the 500 subscriber Q&A, so make sure you have questions down for me in the comments. And as always, have a great night.